Good morning, everybody. This is webinar 160. Sorry we had a little bit of problem trying to get things worked out with Google. Brought to you by WinDev US, PCsoft, WinDev. Appreciate you being here this morning, and I'm all messed up now since we got this screwed up. But Pete Halstead's going to be going over some deals with WebDev for everybody to take a look at, and I'm going to turn it over to him and hopefully get everything else working correctly on this thing. There you go, Pete. Go for it.
All righty. So hopefully we've gotten through the issues and ready to go. What we're going to be looking at today is specifically some mobile considerations when doing web dev development. There was a lot of interest at DevCon. I showed a complete site. There were a few folks that asked about doing mobile development, and there's some different things, and a lot depends on what type of site you're doing and so forth. So the first thing, let's just have a general web design conversation. Basically, you know, I very much preach that it's a project by project consideration. Every project has its own set of parameters that will affect what you need to do as far as mobile development or not, and those sort of things. The one thing that we can be pretty sure of is mobile is not going to go away. It's getting bigger every day, so it's definitely something that is going to be talked about on every project one way or another. So the first thing I do is I for the most part, you can divide sites into one of three categories. It's either a brochure site, it's an Amazon site, or it's a QuickBooks Online site. What I mean by that is brochure sites are good old-fashioned, just informational. Here's my company, here's what we do, more or less static sites. Now they can be database driven, but they're still mainly just static content. Those sites are very easy to develop as responsive sites that you can get to look good at different resolutions and so forth. So not as much issue there. The next category is the Amazon style site, which Amazon, you know, if you go look, it covers the broad category of shopping sites, those sort of things. With that sort of site, it becomes a bit more challenging to do a responsive design. And that's the type of site we're going to be looking at today. And I'll talk in more detail about some considerations that we made when we started with that site. The third category is what I call the QuickBooks Online type site. I lump most of your business applications into that category. And notice I'm saying application, not site. That's a big distinction to me. You know, Amazon is still a website. It's not an application. QuickBooks is an application. I'm doing my accounting online. You know, if you're doing a business application, first, you probably have a little more control over the users, so you know a little more about what devices they are and aren't using. You can also probably rule out that grandma is going to be using the site with her 1995 VGA monitor. So those things also will affect your decisions. What I tend to do with those type of sites, and again, just a rule of thumb that, you know, gets adjusted for every project, but what I tend to do with those type of sites is design the main site for desktop, because let's be honest, nobody's doing their accounting on a cell phone. And then, so I develop for the desktop, and then I might do a few functions here and there for mobile for very specific things. A couple of simple entry screens for some stuff that you would do on the cell phone. But for the most part, the cell phone side of the site is more about information viewing, retrieving than data entry. But anyway, what we're doing today is Amazon style sites. It's a generic shopping site. The particular site we're looking at today is for reserving hotel rooms. When you're looking at developing websites, you basically have three broad categories of browser platforms: desktop, tablet, and phone. For this Amazon style site, I group that into two. I put desktop and tablet together and mobile together, because I can generally develop an app site that looks good on both desktop and tablet, which I'm targeting 1024/768 when I'm doing that, which gets you the original iPad and every tablet out there and every monitor built since 1996. And then for the mobile phone side of it, I target 320 by 460. Now, a lot of your newer mobile phones have higher resolution than that, but even if you do use that higher resolution, the site's going to be so small, it's going to be non-functional. So the target size I use is 320 by 460 for the mobile side. So basically that gives me two different sites that cover the three categories. Trying to make a site that's responsive and looks good for all three as one site is virtually impossible. And you know, my argument for that is, look at Amazon. That's exactly what they're doing. You know, they probably have a development budget that's larger than several countries' gross national product, and they have a mobile site and a desktop site. There's a lot of reasons for that. Along with the look, a lot of times you want to change the interface look and feel some for the mobile as well, because people are using their fingers and doing a lot more touch, so data entry becomes different. So there's a lot of reasons to make that distinction. One last quick thing before we jump into actually looking at the site, because I know it's going to come up. What about native mobile applications? My general rule of thumb on that is, unless I need to take advantage of specific hardware of the phone, be it dialing the phone, using the GPS, using barcode scanners, or some other device connected to the phone, unless I need to natively interface with the phone hardware, I'm going to do mobile web development. The reason for that is I can develop for mobile web, and it's going to work on all the mobile phones. If I go down the road of a native app, I, at the very least, am going to have iOS and Android and possibly Windows Phone. I think I can count BlackBerry out at this point. So you're going to have to do a lot more development. You're also going to be dealing with the cell phone store ecosystems and all those kind of issues. So I don't do mobile native development unless there's a specific need for that native development.
I want to interrupt just for a second there. To everyone out there, the Q&A, questions and answers application found out it had to be started before I started the broadcast. So unfortunately, we don't have that at the moment. So I brought up the Google community for the webinar on the all posts, and if you ask questions there, I will forward them on and give them to Pete, and we'll go from there. So we'll ask questions there, and I'll make sure they get asked for you. Sorry about the trouble. We'll get this straight before it's over with.
Hello. Is that Wolfgang?
Okay. If you've been invited, Glenn, or other words, this is Andy. If you've been Glenn, make sure you turn off your mic and your camera. Okay. That's all yours, Pete.
Yep. Did you have a question, Wolfgang? Or? Yeah, we're in the middle of the webinar, so. All right, so moving forward, you've gotten my little bit of background theory on web development and how it relates to mobile. Let's actually look at the site that we're going to be looking at today, which I have up on the screen. I assume you're seeing that. This is the desktop version of the site. As I mentioned, it's a hotel reservation site. It actually has a considerable amount of private labeling ability, but and we may look at that code in the future, but for today we're looking at design considerations of the desktop/tablet versus the mobile side of the site. So let's take a quick look at the desktop version first. The first thing is I'm using a few tricks. Again, I told you I'm developing for both the desktop and the tablet, which means I'm developing for a target of 1024 by 768 so that I can get even the old iPads. It's going to look good on those. It's going to look good on every desktop. But a lot of desktops now have much larger resolution, so I need to do something to keep it from looking like a little box in the center of the screen. The things I do to accomplish that is the background of the browser and the background of the page, I set those both to the same color so they bleed together. I don't have any kind of border or anything. That keeps that boxy look away. The other thing that I'm doing, and it may be a little harder on this side, usually I use a darker color, but we went with a lighter color on this particular site. The top header band actually stretches the entire width. Although the controls stay centered in that same 1024 area, the band stretches the whole width, and it gives that optical illusion that the site is taking up the entire resolution. So right now we're looking at this site on a 1980 by 1024, and it doesn't feel as boxed in and that what I call the box in the center of the screen, which is exactly what most of the standard web dev templates give you. And just so that you see that we're really actually doing 1024, if I change my resolution to 1024/768, which, by the way, that's a nice little Chrome extension I use to do different screen resolutions. You see that the page is, that's what the page is actually serving as. Nothing actually moved around. That is all that we were seeing when we were in the higher resolution. It just gave the optical illusion that it was not boxed in because of the coloring and the stretching that I'm doing. So that's one of the tricks I use to blend desktop and tablet together. Now for a few specific things that we'll look at compared to the mobile when it comes to interface. Notice the calendar for selecting my arrival and departure dates. We'll see a completely different interface for that when we go to the mobile. We also have the entry controls that you can type in the date via one of the entry controls instead. And then also notice that the screen is basically split into two halves. We have a left-hand side and a right-hand side. That was one of the design considerations we made early on with a thought towards mobile, because what it becomes, and you'll see as we look at the mobile site, is each half becomes a separate page on mobile, which means there's going to be more pages on mobile. Now, we try to use a lot of our same logic, and that separation of the two halves kind of help us do that. We're building the two halves separately. And then on the mobile, they just become separate pages. That lets us give a much more concise, clear interface on mobile. The thing we find on mobile is you really have to be that concise. You know, it's very easy to have information overload on mobile. So we chop it down to one bit of information at a time when we're on the mobile side, and we'll look at that when we look at the mobile side. A couple other things is notice the navigation bar at the top that shows us what step we're on, and will allow the user actually, as they move through the site, to jump back to a previous step. We'll notice on the mobile that we eliminated that ability altogether, and we just give them a back button. The real estate and so forth that takes up, we just decided it wasn't worth it for mobile. So again, those are the considerations you make when you're doing desktop versus mobile, is some features, although they may be nice, they're going to be more trouble than they're worth for mobile, and likely even cause issues with the mobile interface. So that was one feature that we eliminated. One last thing to note on the desktop site is we're using pop-ups to display detailed information, and excuse the ugly formatting here. My sample data is fairly corrupted from some testing we were doing. But you see that we're using a pop-up to get that additional detailed information. When we go to the mobile site, you'll see a different approach to that, because pop-ups don't really lend themselves well to the mobile interface either. So here's the desktop site. As we move through the site, our next page gives us a summary of the reservation we're making, asks for our information, you know, and we basically move through. Once we've entered our information, then we enter our payment information on down the line. So now let's go back and look at the mobile site. And this is the page I'm on now is a testing launch page that we have, so that we're able to do our testing. In the real world, this page wouldn't exist, and we'll get into the code shortly of how I detect mobile or not, and different things. But one of the things I'm going to show you today is how I test mobile from my desktop app as well. Okay, so here's the mobile site. And the first thing you'll notice is it looks drastically different than the desktop site. Starting with the fact that we went with a basic two-tone color. Let me clear these so that you don't have all that purple in your face. We went with a black background, although it's actually a green unit that's going from a gray to a black, just to give it a little bit of extra look. But basically, it's a black background, white text. Makes it very easy to see on mobile phone. Remember, a lot of times when folks are using mobile phones, they're outdoors and so forth. So this makes that much easier to see. And it also seems to give it a very native kind of feel when you're using this app on your actual cell phone. It kind of feels like you're running a native app, even though it's actually a web page. So that's just the general coloring design. The next thing is, notice the big calendar is gone. That big calendar, even if we used all the real estate of our mobile cell phone, which was 320 by 480, that calendar would be so small, at least my fat fingers, it'd be very difficult to select an individual day. So we just decided that the calendar interface was too big and just didn't lend itself well to mobile design. However, most folks, when they're booking a room, they're booking for the next few days. So what we did instead for the mobile is we gave them the shortcut buttons where they can select their arrival and departure just by clicking one of the next 5 days. Now, if they need to book for other dates, we gave them an other dates button. Now, notice on the other dates, the dates still aren't standard entry controls. Again, one of the things I try to do is avoid the pop-up on-screen keyboard as much as possible, because when you do, it always becomes kind of clumsy and hard to work with. It first of all takes up half the screen, so they can't see your interface. So what I try to do is avoid it as much as possible. And entering dates is very cumbersome, because now you got to hope they enter the date correctly and so forth. So what we did instead for this site is we have a combo that has the month and year, and we're only going out a year. We're only letting them book 1 year at a time. So they select a month and a year, and then a separate combo box for the days. So that's just seems to be a much cleaner, easier interface for entering a date on mobile. Again, it depends on exactly what you need, what your interface is, what'll work for you. I've got a couple other date entry controls that I use when I'm doing mobile development as well. The next thing to notice is the 3 entry controls that on the desktop were true edit controls: nights, adults, and children. Again, the way it would work if we did a standard entry control is you would click in the entry control, that would pop up the onboard keyboard, you'd select one. This way, we're able to instead, I just give you the ability to click a plus and a minus, which is much easier to do with my fat fingers, to increase the days and nights and the adults and children. So again, that's another design consideration we made for interface-wise between mobile and web. So now if we actually click on Find a Room, now we see that same page that we saw on the desktop side. It was the right-hand side of our first page. And that's what I was talking about. We had to go to each half of that page became its own page in mobile. And also notice we don't have that navigation bar, but we do have a back button. So you can't jump from step 4 all the way back to step 1 on the mobile. Not something that people do a lot anyway. But you do have back to go back one step at a time. All the information that we had on the mobile or on the desktop is still here. It's just presented in a slightly different fashion. We concatenated the promotion and the room description together, and we showing the price and the savings on it as part of the detail versus on the text of the button. And we don't have the pop-up for the room description, but if we select a room, the next page now has that summary, which was the left-hand side of the second page of the desktop site. And now if we look at the details, notice that they just drop down, and what I'm doing is I'm using a hide show to include that information. So it's the exact same information that was presented in a pop-up on the desktop site, but again, for the mobile site, I'm using a different presentation that just makes it seem to flow a little better. Like I said, pop-ups just don't seem to work well on a mobile. They just don't look natural. So those are some of the design considerations that we made. There's several others, but what I want to do is kind of get into a couple of the coding tips and tricks that made all this possible, and also how I'm testing this. One last thing to note, and this right now, notice we're looking at the site in portrait mode, which is phone standing upright. One of the design considerations that you really have to take into account when you're doing mobile web development is that screen rotation thing. If I turn my phone sideways, the site needs to take advantage and present itself slightly different. So if we look at this in landscape mode, notice that everything shifted around. Most of this I'm doing by standard WebDev anchoring. You notice everything still looks attractive and good even in our landscape mode. One thing that I want to point out, and I'll show you how I'm doing it when we get to the code, is notice that the hotel name or apartment name up here is Apple Apartments Greenwich. Notice when we're in portrait mode, the H disappears. I've got some code that's actually taking care of that, because the last thing I want is for this apartment name to push to 2 lines. Notice how the room and promotion description pushes to 2 lines. I'm okay with that down in the content area, pushing everything down when that rolls onto a second line. But my header, I don't want my header to get pushed to a second line. So I'm having to do a combination of some coding and some anchoring to get that accomplished. If I did just straight anchoring, it would push to a second line. So we'll take a look at that code as well when we get into the site. The last thing we want to look at just while we're looking here is the actual data entry. For the desktop app, I used basic standard entry type controls. For the mobile, I basically have everything split into two cells here. I have statics for captions and cells to the left, and entry controls to the right. And the whole reason for that is when I go to landscape mode, I want the screen to stretch out the entry part of the control and make everything fill the screen again. So that was another little trick of something that we did a little different for the mobile. But you see how the button stretches. You know, it's nothing super crazy fancy, but it just we're keeping that screen filled to make it feel responsive. I by no means want to. You know, the word responsive is way overused today. Very few sites are truly responsive. Most sites give you the illusion of responsiveness, and that is exactly what I'm doing for the most part on this site. Now, I will say that WebDev 21 is coming out with some stuff that looks very promising to get us a little closer to responsiveness. But before you think it's going to be the silver bullet of all silver bullets, remember that even if I was doing pure PHP, HTML code, whatever, responsive web design is very easy to do on content sites. Your blog is very easy to do of responsive design. But when you get into a business application with data entry controls and so forth, that becomes very difficult to pull off as a true responsive design, no matter what your underlying technology is. It just doesn't lend itself well to responsiveness. And, you know, what are you going to do? Just make the edit controls giant? You know, you can't just move things around. There's a flow to the way a data entry screen needs to look. You can't just let things shift around randomly for responsive and so forth. So, you know, I think that the true silver bullet of responsive for data entry web applications is something that we may never completely see. So, you know, that don't let the marketing hype make you think that you're not doing what you need to be doing. So anyway, let's take a look at a couple of the codes and other pieces. First thing, let's talk about how I'm testing this site. I'm testing the mobile site even though I'm still on my desktop. First, as you saw, during testing, I have this. Let me shut this down so you can see the desktop. I have this launch page where we're launching into the demo because we're doing the private label testing and a lot of other things. So during testing, we actually have this front-end launch page, which that allows me to trigger the mobile mode even though I am on my desktop. So that's the first piece of this. But if I launch it, that's still not a very good representation of what that thing's going to look like on a phone, is it? And the reason why is that's all my anchoring kicking in and shifting everything around. You know, I don't have a 23-inch cell phone. It doesn't fit my pocket very well. So this is where Chrome comes in handy. And forgive me, I'm sure Firefox, the other tools have similar features, but Chrome is the one I know. So if I hit Control-Shift-J to get into the console, one of the options in the console is emulation. and I can tell it that I want to emulate an iPhone 4, an iPhone 5, on down the line. So I can emulate the original iPad and see what it's going to look like on a tablet. So that's what it would look like if we presented it on a tablet. I can emulate the original iPhone 4. And then at the top, I can also change between portrait and landscape mode. So that is how I'm testing the general look and feel. Now, this is not completely testing browser functionality, although at this point, most of the mobile phones, the browser functionality is pretty compatible between desktop and mobile. But do understand, you're only testing the sizing and the look and feel of the mobile. You're not truly testing the browser compatibility of the mobile. To do that, you're going to have to publish the site and actually look at it on the phone to make 100% sure. And that is what I do once I've got the site closed. Then I actually publish it and start looking at it on a true phone. But that day-to-day development as I'm going along, I use this emulation tool of Chrome so that I can look at the site in mobile. So that's one of the tricks of mobile development, is using that tool so that I can see what the site looks like. Now let's look at some code. See, where is that code? It's actually, I believe, in the project code. I could be wrong about that, though. Here we go. It's in the constructor of my global variable class. First thing I did was I created a global variable for mobile mode. The reason I'm doing that is I didn't want to test for mobile on each instantiation of a page or anything. So I do it once, and then I set a global variable to say, hey, you're in mobile mode, and that directs me to the different pages. The other thing that did for me was allow me to add a checkbox to that test launch page where I'm able to turn on mobile mode manually so that I can test from my desktop app. So this is a standard WebDev function, browser platform. So it tells me what platform they're coming from. And you see that I'm testing for Android, iPhone, Windows Mobile, Windows Phone. If it's any of those, I kick into mobile mode. So that's how I am detecting that you're on a mobile phone and sending you to the mobile site. Now the other piece of code that we wanted to look at, this is my template for the mobile pages. One of the things was that rotating the screen back and forth between landscape and portrait. And if we look at the events, let me close that. Folks have often asked for where is that event for the window changing resolution. You know, we have the load event, we have the unload event, and we can add additional events down here. But if we go through here and look, there's on focus, on change, on click, but there's none that represent that change from portrait to landscape mode. And I've seen that question asked several times on forums, is how do you detect that? How do you do anything with that? Well, what I found was we can do that very easily if we go in with a little JavaScript code. And all I'm doing is on the page, I'm embedding a little JavaScript function that says anytime the window resizes.
Can you make it a little larger?
Yep. Actually, no, I can't.
Okay.
Pop it in the notepad, though. How's that? So this is just a simple little JavaScript function that says anytime, which this is standard jQuery and browser DOM code. Anytime the window resizes, execute the function Resize Logic. That's all this little piece of code does. So then, if we look, I've actually got a browser function called Resize Logic. Now, this allows me to issue exact code anytime you change from portrait to landscape mode. This feature is going to, this function is going to be executed. It's actually going to be executed anytime you resize. You know, if you anytime you're stretching the screen to do that function's actually getting executed. Anytime the resolution, the dimensions of the browser screen change, that function's getting executed. Now on the mobile browser, that really only happens when you rotate portrait to landscape mode. So anytime that happens, it executes this function. And what this function is doing is if we look at the zone header and we look at the anchoring, it's saying that it's adapting to content, which means that you notice that little button is, I'm actually only using a very small space for the hotel name, and then I've got the button stuck right behind it. But because I have the hotel name set to adapt to content, it stretches out as wide as it needs to fit. And that keeps the button tucked right against the end of the name. So what it's doing here is that hotel name stretches out, the button stays to the left of it. But if that hotel name is too long, because it's adapting to content, it's going to push it down a row. So now my header row becomes taller than 25 pixels. So all this code is doing is saying, hey, if that height of that header is greater than 25, then subtract a letter off of the name. And then check to see if the height is still greater than 25, and all it does is loop through there. So all it's doing is it keeps pulling a letter off of that name until that header row jumps back up to only being 25 pixels tall. So that is how I am getting that that field to refresh portrait and landscape and not go to a second row. Now that's just the code that's on my template. Now on specific pages, if there's something I want to do, say in landscape mode, I want to incorporate additional details that I don't incorporate in the portrait mode, I could override this function on a specific page and add that additional code to do that. So that gives you some advantage of being able to do some stuff, and the trick to the whole thing was just that little bit of JavaScript code to fire this function anytime your screen resolution changes. That all would be a little easier if we had an event for, just like we have the onload and the unload events, if we had a resize event, that would be where we would put that code. But since they didn't give us that resize event, I basically have created that resize event with that little bit of JavaScript code. So that's a few quick little coding tips. Again, we just touching our feet into the actual coding of mobile, and truly, for the most part, mobile design development coding-wise is not really any different than any other web. It's really more about design considerations and how you design it, and that's the reason we took a look at some of those comparisons. You know, the actual code isn't any different. It's just how we design it to take advantage of the form factor that we happen to be in. We'll probably, over the next month or so, dive in a little deeper into a few of the other specific features that we're doing for the mobile, but I just wanted to kind of give everyone a preview and some general thoughts and concepts of mobile web development as a primer, so to speak. So now would be the time we can open it up to some questions.
Yeah, post all the questions. Yeah, excuse me. Post all the questions on the Google Plus community. If you look on the discussions area or the all posts, you'll see it. The first one is there for the webinar 160 Uncle Pete's Corner. I'm looking there for the questions because of Google Hangouts and not necessarily being correct on getting the Q&A running right, and I apologize for that, but we'll do some testing and I'll figure this thing out before it's done. So if you'll post it there, I will turn around and ask Pete the question. Or if any one of our group down below, Arnold, Ben, Glenn, all you have to do is unremark your mic and you can ask whatever questions you want. Well, you're just freaking awesome, Pete.
I know it. I thoroughly answer any question that could possibly come up.
Hey, Pete.
Yes.
Pete, it's Arnold.
Hey, Arnold. How are you, buddy?
Good. So, how are you handling the mobile and tablet? Are you kind of making it show more, or?
What I am doing is that the tablet is using, in this particular site, and again, that's where, you know, it's a project by project consideration. For this particular project, the tablet is showing the desktop version of the site instead of the mobile version of the site.
Okay. So it'll be the full thing, but it's just smaller, right? So.
Well, I target the entire site for 1024/768, so it fits a tablet or desktop.
So the 7 inches should look pretty good then.
Right, and that was some of the things I showed at the beginning, I think, before you got in, is some of the visual tricks that I'm using to make that desktop site, when it's being hosted in a larger screen, still look like it's using up more screen real estate than it really is. The standard WebDev templates tend to give you that box in the center of the screen look, which just draws your attention to the fact that you're not using all the screen resolution. And my designs tend to bleed those edges away and do some other tricks to kind of trick your brain into thinking that you're using more real estate than you actually are.
Like a native, kind of.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, gotcha. Thanks.
I'm still looking to see if there's any questions. I'm sure that there will probably be some posted out there, and just as an FYI, we're recording this under WINDEV US on the YouTube channel WINDEV WxLive US. If you post questions out there, not likely we'll see them because we don't usually go up to YouTube and take a look at them afterwards. So, okay. So if you post them on the webinar training section or this webinar, then we can easily find them and answer them, since the email comes to us that they're there. Ben wanted you to show the JavaScript, the ES JavaScript again that you had, I believe, sure, in the notepad. I believe that's what he was looking for.
Yeah. It's a little bit of code that fires off the resize logic, and again, all you do is that's in the HTML header, or I'm actually putting it in the footer, which is a kind of a you can go in the header or footer. Traditionalists tell you that you should put your JavaScript code in the footer so that it doesn't interfere with the initial running of the page. But all it is a simple little piece of JavaScript code that says anytime the resize event fires for the window, run Resize Logic, which is the name of my browser function. Now, one thing to remember in all this is you're dealing with JavaScript now. So notice the R and the L are caps. When we look at my browser function, which this is WINDEV browser code here.
Right.
Notice the R and the L are also caps. Otherwise, that JavaScript function is not going to find it.
It is case sensitive.
It is absolutely case sensitive. So that's one thing to get to be sure to be mindful of. But you know, remember, even though you're developing WebDev code, the browser only knows CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. That's the only three things the browser knows. So any code you write is getting converted to JavaScript code. So that's why I'm able to call this WebDev function from JavaScript, because if it's getting converted to JavaScript on the page. And if we actually look at the page code of the page, we can find that JavaScript function.
Okay. Sounds like a winner. And his comment says, yeah, you're using the window object, and he wasn't sure, I guess, that you were using the window object there.
Right.
With the dollar sign.
That's the standard browser DOM, which says anytime the window resizes, which on the mobile would be anytime you rotate your phone from portrait to landscape mode.
Okay. Now, obviously, on the phone, it only works if you have connectivity to the internet.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That is one other. that is one other consideration to the whole developing a native app or not. You know, if you need to work offline, then you have no choice but to do a native app.
That's correct. Correct.
Yeah. So there are reasons for developing a native app, but just because you need to present some information on a mobile phone is not a good reason to do it as a native app, unless you just particularly want to pull out what little hair you have left.
Yeah. As a note, we are not too far away from starting to take a look at version 21, at least the PDF file and stuff. Usually late February is when you start seeing it. Mid to late February is when you start seeing it, so keep your eye out for it. There was a webinar, obviously it's in French, that Jerome put together dealing with a new feature called telemetry. It's in version 21. If you do know French or something like that, and Ben's probably seen it, it is supposed to grab statistics from your end user application. So there's something there that we're definitely going to get into in the future, take a look at and see what's going on with it. But I know that we're getting close to seeing what's going on. I've kind of looked through the French version and done my best to try to figure out a few things in there. And now there's some nice little features that's coming out in 21. So
yeah, there's definitely on the web dev front, they have done a lot of work.
Yeah.
For a lot of the stuff that you see me using jQuery and so forth to do now, they're making a little easier to do natively. So I definitely, as we get closer to that launch, I will be showing some of those features and showing the way we've had to do it and the way we can do it moving forward. But they are definitely paying a lot more attention to the web standards of CSS and so forth. So they're every version they make huge jumps in that area, and 21 is no exception.
Yeah, it's usually they're saying according to PCSoft that the English release date is going to be in April. So that's something to look forward to, but that usually means we'll be going ahead and pre-doing, and beta would be in March. And I've been pretty impressed with the betas, really impressed with the betas. A few things, but for the nice part, they've been pretty good. So there's nothing saying you can't order today. We can get you, Mark can get you prices and stuff today if you wanted them. But either direction, I know that's coming up, and if you really want to kind of peruse and work with it, then feel free to let us know.
Yeah, and if you buy the French version when the English version comes out,
yeah, you get it. Yeah, you can buy the international version, is what they call it.
Yeah,
and then you get them both. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So we're kind of helping Mark out the best we can since things have changed there at Editech. We're out there, Pete, myself, and Glenn, and WXperts. So anything we can help you with in that area, we'll be glad to. I apologize for not getting the Q&A up and running. I will do a couple of tests with Glenn and Pete, or Pete and Glenn, and try to figure out this Google Hangouts before the next session in 2 weeks. We do one every other week. If anyone out there has a little presentation they would like to provide, please let me know. We will be more than happy to set it up, make sure everything is working right, life is good, all that, and move forward. Anybody got anything else they'd like to throw out on the table before we shut this down for the morning and actually go make a living? No? No? Well, then all I can say is y'all be good or be good at it, and we will talk at y'all later.